All right, and welcome to what we're going to call episode 77 of the Athletic Philosopher podcast. Shout out to number 77, Pierre Turgeon, uh, big Montreal Canadiens guy here. Nick Suzuki just passed you for the most points I've ever seen a Montreal Canadian player get. You were number 77 and hit 96. Mr. Nick Suzuki, number 14, just hit 101 last night. But we are not here to talk about hockey today. I have a very special guest, Mr. Martin Dugard. I hope I pronounced that correctly, sir, who is the author of this fantastic new book on the running boom of the 1970s and beyond. And it's really a very fascinating history into distance running itself. And we are going to talk all things running, all things sport as self-expression. And I'm just very excited to invite and to host Martin today. Tomorrow is the big day that the long run hits bookstores everywhere. So do yourself a favor and go pick up a copy. You will not be disappointed. And just welcome to the show, Martin. Thank you so much for being here.
Jordan, thanks for having me.
All right. I have a bunch of fun questions that I have lined up, but I think the best way to sort of get into this entire discussion about history and some of the personalities and heroic stories that you've outlined for us in this book would be for you to define what is a long run.
Oh, that's a good question.
Yeah.
Well, it depends. I coach high school as well as writing, and I've done that for about 20 odd years. And so, for us, it's a Saturday morning, and I think anything over about 60 minutes qualifies as a long run. And we like to keep it conversational. We might throw in a hill loop every now and then. We want to finish with a couple miles at tempo just to, get the legs used to it. But I think more from a philosophical point of view, a long run is a nice conversational time with your friends just to kind of unload, talk about the week, talk about life, and just go out there and have a good time.
I really appreciate how you just defined the long run in terms of the space that it opens up, as opposed to any sort of distance that you have to travel. Maybe 60 minutes is the minimum requirement in terms of opening up space. But some of the things that you just highlighted there, like conversation, easy pace, that kind of comes out a lot in the book and with your connection to running. So now we've got the long run defined. Why tell the story of the long run? Like, why is this story on your heart? What is it that you wanted to express in the telling of basically how distance running slowly came to be, and then how over, the time of the 20th century really exploded in popularity at certain moments with certain personalities really punctuating that?
Well, I've been writing history for a long time, 25 years or so, and I've been a runner since I was probably about 11 years old. So, the vast majority of my adult life. And for some reason, it just never dawned on me that I could combine those twin passions. And my editor just said, why don't you do something about the 70s running boom, which I thought was kind of a lame topic until I started digging into it because it's fascinating. It's really not about the running boom. It's about a revolution. It changed the way we exercise, the way we eat, the way we dress, the way people build, subdivisions. They used to just put in a clubhouse so you could go play pool. Instead, now they have trails, so you can hike or you can run, you can do whatever you want. And the more I dug into it, the more that I found it to be very rewarding, and I couldn't help but at some point kind of relive my own journey as a runner and a historian, and I kind of weave it all into the story. And so, ideally, when people read this, they're not reading some rote history. They're reading a page turner. I like history to be brisk. I like history to be iconic. The characters should really be special and rise up off the page. So that's what I've tried to do with this book.
Yeah, I would say you succeeded tremendously as a as an academic historian myself, and one who's wrote the opposite of a page turner when it comes to a history or a book. Your description of your own writing is spot on, and it is a compelling read. It is a very interesting read, and the one thing that sticks out to me, at least as I was reading over the past couple weeks, was that running is an amazing arena for storytelling, just generally speaking. Um, so now that we've got a little bit of the what in terms of what is the long run and the why, that this story just kept on becoming so much more captivating and impactful. Why do you think running as a sport is such an amazing arena for storytelling generally? Um, you came across a topic and maybe didn't think there was much there, but running sort of
It's
provides help.
I think just you just start with the nuts and bolts of endurance running. It is not a normal activity. It is something that takes you beyond out of the realm of the mediocre and puts you in a position as an individual to do something a little bit above and beyond. It is rarely comfortable. It is not something that people choose to do as their first priority. Everybody starts as a sprinter, and slowly, when you realize that you're not a sprinter, you go to longer and longer distances until you find out that, hey, I'm pretty good at going out for a marathon. So, and the thing about it is, and so that breeds a certain kind of character. People like Steve Prefontaine and Bill Bowerman. These people are iconic, and so they don't live in the realm of the average, and they do above average things. And so that's like a gift to a storyteller, because if all these people were just very vanilla mundane people, it wouldn't be much fun to write about them. But they're all just these super they can be contrary, they can be bold, they can be very aggressive, and it's, to me, that makes for stuff that just rises up off the page.
Yeah. There's a real heroic arc that sort of flows through each one of the individuals that you've selected. Um, and from my vantage as a former professor of sport, that heroism and linking these personalities to almost like a mythology is one of the reasons I think sports are so captivating and are so enduring. Um, did you pick the individuals in the book based on your own romantic remembrance of them, or was it in concert with the research that unearthed, the people whose stories you thought, I have to tell this person's story in more detail?
A little bit of both. I like that term, the heroic aspect of it, because I I spent a lot of time writing this book, and it really never dawned on me that these people were heroic, but they certainly were. Um, it's in its original iteration, the book was going to start with the 1972 Olympics and Frank Shorter's victory in the marathon, which everybody agrees kind of changed, what we think of as the modern uh, notions of distance running. But then, what, and again, you talk about the characters, me picking the characters, then they kind of picked me, because if I'm going to tell Shorter's story, I've got to tell Steve Prefontaine's story because it's taking place at the same time. And if I'm going to tell Steve Prefontaine's story, I've got to go back to Bowerman. And if I'm going to do Bowerman, we might as well go all the way back to 1896 and talk about that first Olympic marathon and how we got this running boom going. And then these people just came out of nowhere. I mean, I had no idea I'd be putting JFK into a running book. I mean, JFK, it was hardly your idea of a runner, but he did start a cultural revolution with his notion that we could be a little bit more fit as a country. So all these people they kind of weave in and out. I mean, it's fascinating, because sometimes when you write a book, you really have to struggle to find the arc of each character. And instead, all of these characters, it's a I would say a brotherhood or a sisterhood. These people just kind of wove together, and when I got to the end of the book, it's what had been difficult to write as I did the research and to really get to the root of everything. By the time I got to the book, it felt like it had written itself, because these people just kind of came over out of nowhere and wanted to talk to me. And whether that was spiritually, like with Prefontaine, I've got his picture on the wall here in my office, or somebody like Greta Weitz, who, the more I read about her performance in the New York City Marathon, an amazing woman. So, and then we tell this whole story, like how those people inspired literally millions of other people to put on a pair of running shoes and step out the door and do something uncomfortable.
Yeah, I mean, it's striking to me that the heroic arc wasn't necessarily something that you explicitly put in there, but, implicitly, and this goes back, just like in your book, thousands and thousands of years to the ancient Greeks, that was their reason for praising the athlete as a moral exemplar, was so people could imitate their discipline, their sacrifice, their determination, their willingness to keep moving forward despite all of the adversity and all of the trials and tribulations. So maybe I'm just biased because heroism is the language that I often talk about when it comes to sport. But to me, that was a very strong and powerful theme that wove together specifically all the four individuals that you talked about, and that are mentioned on the title of the book, but also some of the other, we'll call them supporting characters. Um, is this something that I'm fascinated by where this is going as a writer, as a historian, as a runner. There's lots of places we could go. But did the way in which you researched and ultimately wrote the history of running, was that similar or different from the ways in which you've presented other histories?
Little bit different. You mentioned that the ancient Greeks. I was so reluctant to put them into the book because if you tell people you put ancient Greeks into the book, it's just, you can tell people just nodding off right away. So I had to make them interesting. I had to, dip my toe into it, get their story out there because they really are the people who got this whole thing going. But and that was the challenge with this book, because usually if you're going to write about, for instance, an historical figure, one person, you can do like a straight biography and just tell their whole life, or you can tell a seminal moment in their life or a seminal achievement, or if you're writing about a battle, like let's say the Battle of Britain, I've done a book on that, and then you have this overarching 4 month battle scenario where you have to weave the people in and with all the major events. So when I did this, it was different because it's taking all these people going back to the Greeks all the way literally up to right now with the 1.1 million people who signed up to run the London Marathon in a couple weeks. When you take all that, how do you tell that story and make it something that, because usually you need a narrative tentpole, you need something that people can cling to. You need a hero figure. And I couldn't find that figure, but I found a number of those figures, like you mentioned. And then at some point, it was like one of those duh moments where I realized that the hero in this whole thing is just the sport of running and the way that running has transformed society. And once I figured that, then the book just took me on a roller coaster ride, and that was super fun.
Oh, that's really neat how it comes together. I guess different histories require different narratives and different storytelling devices in order to get the story right.
Yeah, definitely. And I've written I've written a few history books, and so I've kind of come at it from all sorts of different angles. And I mean, long ago, my first history book was about Captain Cook, the British explorer, and I just knew one thing: is I didn't want to write academic histories. I didn't want to do something where there. I'm not taking jabs at academic historians.
Please do. I'm no longer in the academy.
But I wanted people to pick up, like I love history. I've loved history since I was a kid. So and for the vast majority of histories that you read, they're boring. They put you to sleep. You read them at bedtime, and after 2 pages, you're out. So what I wanted to write a book that would keep people up late into the night. So if people were reading my stuff, I wanted it to be, action oriented. I wanted cliffhanger endings. I wanted big, bold characters that just really, really challenge you. And so that's what I feel like makes this book a little bit special, because it's not a running book. It's not a running boom book. It's it's like this odyssey that everybody should just buckle up and go along for the ride.
Yeah, I agree with that. It's definitely a page turner. I love the way it moves throughout different time periods, back and forth between different personalities, keeping the reader on their toes, but captivating and compelling. Um, okay, so running is the hero. Running is the hero of the book. And then there's another theme that strikes me, which is like romance, like absolute romance. So what is it about running that lends itself to like romance or a romantic telling or a romantic envisioning of the athletes and of the people who strap on their shoes and go out for a long run?
Here's the thing: running is such a singular experience that it's a. I mean, I kind of mentioned this in the book that if you want to write a book about your own running experiences, good luck, because some people might buy the book, just hoping to maybe learn a little bit, but for the most part, everybody's experience is so different that everybody feels like they can write their own running book, telling their own story. And a lot of people do that. And so what I wanted with this was not to insert too much of myself into the story, but it's kind of hard not to put just a little bit in there because, someone asked me recently what running has meant to my life, and I'd never been asked that question before, but it's pretty much everything. It's like I say this to the runners I coach as well. As like running will make you a better, you know, parent, a better employee, a better boss, a better everything, because you learn these skills like endurance and perseverance and toughness and grit, and there is a sense of romance to that, and it really is just one of those wonderful things where there are these traits that running brings out in all of us that really already exist, but that we idealize them when we see them in other people, perhaps on the big screen or something like that. But when they come out in all of us, all of a sudden you realize that running makes you your own better version of yourself, which is why no matter what, when you see people finish a marathon or a half marathon or a 10K or a 5K, they have a look of like, I just did this. I just did something amazing. Went beyond myself. And that's a universal thing. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I have been at a race and watched people finish and just get this big smile in the midst of enormous suffering, because it's a wonderful idealization of how we can push ourselves beyond our perceived limits.
Oh, that's a beautiful way of phrasing that, and it encapsulates a lot of what I personally do now with running, as a I would call it a self-transcendent tool in sort of in our
Yeah.
personal development journeys, which I coach and I help individuals, achieve these big breakthroughs in life by first allowing them to feel these breakthroughs in the arena. And I myself am a runner, so many of them follow my lead. But it's a really powerful through line, that it's not just something that is occurring to you, and you do write about this, I would say, appropriately throughout the book in terms of your own connection to the sport and what it's doing for you and meaning for you. But certainly in terms of some of the characters that you've outlined. So maybe what I'll do is I'll ask you about some of the what you view as the romantic heroic elements of some of the big individuals that you name. And I'm going to start out with that very first Olympic marathon, and what I believe is probably the most romantic of all victories in all of sports in all of time, which is Spiro Lewis and the 1896 Athens marathon at the very first Olympic Games. So, what is it about Spiro Lewis and that marathon that just drips romance and heroism to you?
First of all, he's the underdog, and we all love an underdog. And on top of that, his girlfriend slash wife to be is out on the course, giving him orange juice and in wine. That was kind of the Gatorade of the day. In the fact that he was Greek and he finished. He was not the favorite. There, so many other people who thought that they should have been the favorite. A different kind of European and American group of distance runners either quit or just collapsed and couldn't go on. And he made it look easy. And when he ran into the stadium, all these Greeks saw a Greek win, and it was just the most remarkable moment. I mean, wouldn't we all? I mean, in our fantasies, just to win an Olympic marathon and to do it in front of a home audience with a stadium full of people just waving the flag, whether it's the Canadian flag or the American flag or whatever. It's just that moment where you feel it's the dream of every would-be Olympian.
Yeah, I mean, talk about an underdog. He's a general laborer, and
Yeah,
not somebody who really is what we would consider as someone who is tracking for an elite athletic performance. Um,
I love though that he trained literally by running alongside this wagon that was carrying barrels of water to and from as part of the family business. So he was every day running, 14 or 15 miles without really thinking too much of it. And that was his job.
yeah, and just to provide a little even more historical context, the very first event in any Olympics was the Stad race, which was basically like a 100-meter out and back, which was run at the very first ancient Olympics in 776 BC. And I believe the person that won was a water carrier.
You know what? I did not know that. That's great.
Yeah.
See, there we go. There we go. We're building on the legacy.
So, if sports are about anything, they're about mythology.
Yeah.
That's for sure. But that idea of like the humble roots of a person bringing out their best through athletics, but not determining their entire life through athletics. That was the ancient ideal of athletics as this place of personal transcendence. So I think Spiro Lewis is great. Princess Margaret or Queen Margaret. What about her?
Uh,
What about her in the romance?
you mean Mary?
Mary, pardon me.
Mary, yeah. She
Got my
was.
got my got my M's wrong. I apologize.
It's interesting. Okay, so she would go on to become Queen of England, and she would at the time of the 1908 Olympics, she was the Princess of Wales, and so and she was a very formidable woman, and I love when I find characters like that because they're people who most people don't know about unless you really study the monarchy. She wouldn't be on your top 10 list of celebrities, but she was she was just a woman of backbone, and like I say in the book, she didn't take any shit off of anybody. So she was one of those people. And it was interesting when I was researching the book. I went to White City, which is where the old stadium used to stand, where the finish line of the 1988 Olympics. And as I went back to my hotel that night, and I hadn't even noticed it before, but there is a picture of a group of royals on the wall, just in the hallway of my hotel, and Mary was one of them. And I was one of those things I kept looking. It's like, what are you doing here? It was it was great because, she's the reason. Well, she gets blamed as being the reason for that we go 26.2 instead of 24 or 25. But her personality, her fortitude, it just when I found that character, I just couldn't wait to write about her.
Yeah, and not to take too much away from the book, but she has an interesting story to tell in this the mythology of the marathon and its distance, right?
She does. She's the link of it. And what I love, and it's not in the early galleys. It's in the final version of the book because they had the Long Beach Marathon here not too long. When I was finishing up the book, and they run right past the Queen Mary. That big ocean liner is named for her, and so I couldn't. It had kind of been staring at me the whole time. I never even realized that was her. That she was the Queen Mary. She was the one that was the ship that Winston Churchill went back and forth to the United States on. So during World War II. So I had to put that in the book. So 23,000 people ran the Long Beach Marathon last year. All of them are running past the Queen Mary. I guarantee you, not one person knew that she was the reason they went 26.2 instead of 24, 25.
Yeah. What a neat little historical wrinkle. And the I don't even know the right word. It's almost like they're concentric narratives, the way that you've weaved all
Yeah,
these different circles of personality in your book. Almost like the Olympic rings, almost as a chain. Your book is great at uncovering these long lost romantic influences, and in particular on the marathon. But given that the marathon is the most participated in race around the world, and then certainly in running too. Another one of those really interesting characters. Forgive me if I get it wrong again. I'm a bad Commonwealther. I apologize to the monarchy. Lord Bessaborough.
Desborough. He
Desborough. Close.
he again another one of those people that you read about him, and he's a big game hunter. He's a fishes for tarpon off the coast of some tropical place. But at the same time, he was a conservator. I mean, he fought to keep the Thames from becoming industrialized. And just one of those really, really, I call him the most interesting man in London, just because he is so full of life and charisma. He was born with a silver spoon in his mouth, but he dedicated his life to public service. And one of those things was he was the guy who brought the Olympic Games to London. He didn't just bring the games. He was the one who got the stadium built in record time and oversaw. He was one of the starters of the 1908 marathon at Windsor Castle, and in fact, he is the one that, if Princess Mary gets blamed as being the reason for the 26.2, but it's actually Desborough's fault because he wanted the King Edward to be the starter of the race, and to entice him to be the starter of the London Marathon, he literally moved the starting line back 1.2 miles. So all of a sudden, you had just this random thing, and it's not recorded historically, but given what Desborough did and his many contacts, I think it was 1920 or 1921 when World Athletics just basically said the marathon distance is going to be 26.2. I guarantee you Desborough was behind that, because there were actually longer and shorter marathons, in the years after 1908. But so for them to standardize that particular distance shows a long influence from a guy like Desborough in the British.
Yeah, it's so neat to move back in time and see that what we consider to be standard in sport for all intents and purposes, how we experience it is anything but standard to the people that have to work it out. And I'd love to come back to this because there's another theme that I picked up in reading your book, and sort of like that tension that we get between, on one sense, like a pre-modern understanding of sport and a modern understanding of sport. And just that basic between the feel of it and between like the numbers and the commercialization and the popularity boom, like that tension between insiders in an outside sport versus insiders and now an insider sport. When something that's just for you ends up becoming just for everybody in terms of being mainstream. So I'd love to return to that, but if you have a thought on that, please jump on in.
No, I know how that felt because so let's go back to the 1970. First of all, after 1908, there was a huge running boom. Going up to the start of World War One. Running was, Durando Pietri and Johnny Hayes, the two guys who battled for the gold medal in 1908. They did a full marathon inside Madison Square Garden just a few months later. So that's 10 laps to the mile for 26.2 miles. And not only that, Madison Square Garden was jammed to the rafters. You had a lot of Italians, you had a lot of Irish because of the ethnicity there. You had people smoking and drinking and singing. I can't even imagine what it was like to run a marathon with the cigarette smoke and pipe smoke in the air. And so, but running had a little boom back, before World War II. And then of course, the war took all the wind out of the sails. But kind of flash forward to 1970 and the first New York City Marathon. The first Boston Marathon was 1897, but 1970, New York finally got its own marathon. 127 people started, 55 finished. They paid $1 to enter. And everybody was kind of just a running nerd then. And running was like a subset of a subset of a subset within the sporting world. But these people came out. It's a Sunday morning. It was very warm. They were doing laps around Central Park. And it was just kind of a very insular society, and everybody liked it that way. Nobody was looking forward to an explosion of running's popularity. It was kind of, the nerd factor was very, very high. And 2 years later, when Shorter won in Munich, and all of a sudden people started coming to the sport, myself among them, it just became, it gained in popularity. I mean, I could measure as a young individual because the cost of an entry fee went from $1 a race to $2 a race. And I remember one time when I was 15, there was a new local 10K, and they were charging $10 for the entry fee, and I thought that was scandalous. I boycotted the race, like, we're not going to pay that much money for that. But then, in the late 70s, as people began coming into this sport, this thing that was so special and so unique and so uniquely personal. At first, there was a little bit, from my own point of view, and I know from a lot of other runners at the time, like, who are all these people? They don't belong in our cool sport, our cool little, quiet sport that nobody knows about. And all of a sudden, people, and they start showing up in, Nike Cortez and, matching, shorts and singlets. And, I mean, when I ran in high school, the cool thing was not to match. Like, you ran in your Nike waffles, which were unique, which were the first of a kind. And we'd have some kind of random color shorts. And, maybe the t-shirt we wore was, whatever we could pick out of the hamper that morning. But it was nice to be part of this counterculture movement. And when it became mainstream, It was a little confusing at first. It was a little bit like, I'm not sure I want to do this anymore because all these people I've been trying to get away from my whole life are suddenly right here with me.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's something that seems to reverberate in the history of running. And it's certainly something that you see now with, I don't know what number we would call this, but we'll call it the post-COVID running boom, with people determining if you're a runner or not based on how fast you can run or how many miles per week you can run. There's always this categorization issue, and I just find it really intriguing how running seems to move between counterculture and mainstream culture, and counterculture and mainstream culture. One of the thoughts that I had, especially with this, oh my gosh, the people I've been trying to get away from are now all side of my space. It's that, running is this place of mass participation, which we do not get in other sports, especially for adults. But I think for some of us who might, love the pure sport of running or the pure expression, maybe what we are against is the consumption of running as a commodity. The people who show up. Well, there was one race that you described as it was actually a running fashion show as opposed to a race.
Yeah.
I wonder if you have a comment on that idea, that participation. While some people participate for the love of the sport, we have other people that participate for the consumption of the sport. And maybe that's a good way to think about some of the groups that come into the sport these days.
Yeah, I've got a kind of a unique perspective just because as a runner, I've been able to do a lot of things. I raced competitively in high school and college, so I know that side. I know what it's like to be kind of at the elite level, where you can go out and knock down a bunch of 5-minute miles without thinking too much about it. And I've had my marathon phase. That was a good 30 years, and I remember one time specifically, my brother-in-law said, "Hey, I'm going to go run the LA Marathon this Sunday. You want to pace me?" And it was a Friday evening, and at the time I was younger, my fitness was high, so I didn't think anything of just going out and jumping into a marathon. Of course, I banded it. I didn't have a number, and just pacing this guy through a whole marathon. And then, but I've done triathlons, I've done 2-week adventure races, but now I'm at the point in life where I just like to go out by myself and find a trail and just be quiet. And so I kind of am viewing the current running boom through that prism. I love to coach. My competitive side is is sated through coaching. But the I'm not Henry David Thoreau, but I have an almost a Thoreau-like simplicity about my running right now. And so it goes back to like the late 60s when there was this debate about, who were the runners and who were the joggers, and joggers was a bitter, awful term. And, now there are people who are like, all they're focusing on is getting their Boston Marathon qualifier. I say, live and let live. And a friend of mine said something really, really smart one day. And he said, because he said, no matter how fast you go or how slow you go, if you're running down the street and a car passes by you, they don't go, that's a slow guy, or that's a fast guy, or that's an elite guy. They all say the same thing. That's a runner. And that's, to me, that's the definition of why we do what we do.
Yeah, I love that. And you have so much experience in so many different arenas of running that this live and let live seems to me to be the best way, especially when, if running can be this part of a revolution in health, as you sort of outlined at the beginning of this talk, right? That the running boom is more of a revolution. It's linked more to, personal agency through taking stock and control over your personal health. Well, then shouldn't the point be to create the most massive amount of participants possible, and who cares what the intention is, as long as we're getting people from not moving to moving, and from thinking that moving isn't fun to having a great time moving. I would just say the more the better, and I think that's kind of like what you're saying as well.
Well, and that's learned over a lot of years of, being very judgmental. I can be as judgy as anybody. But I think the dichotomy in our sport is that we are a competitive sport. I mean, so we wear the watch, we keep splits, we keep track of our miles, we do all those things. But at the same time, if you have a mass participation moment, even within your own personal battle to be faster or to beat a time or a person, you're out there with all these people and you're experiencing the joy of community. And I don't think you can be a runner of any level and disavow that notion that you are part of a greater community. And that's kind of what makes it cool. I just read the London Marathon 2027 is thinking about going to 2 days of marathoning so they can get many more people to finish the marathon. And I feel like that's kind of the future, is because, if we have 60,000 people ran New York last year, but, so many hundreds of thousands more tried to get into the race and couldn't. So that speaks to wanting to be part of a club, wanting to be part of a movement, wanting to be part of, like I said, a community, and then you're kind of getting shut out. So no matter how fast you are, maybe you're just not going to get that spot. So we all want in. We all want to be part of it, but at the same time, we all want to keep our individuality too, because that's part of being a runner. So that's the duality of what we do. We want to be individuals, but we also want to be with other people.
Anything that's a paradox to me is a lead. So I love that. There's one line that I think can help us understand this from your vantage, and I think it's related to this idea of freedom. And it's, quote, I'm quoting you now: "All I can remember is that running felt like freedom. That running felt like freedom." And to me, when we're talking about freedom and running and this idea of self-expression or personal transcendence, which is to me what I'm most interested about sport, and what I hope to turn people onto and make them believers in themselves by making them believe that they can do this stuff through sports. What's the relationship between running and freedom, and how do you think that helps to bridge this duality of participating and belonging, but also, striving and achieving and self-actualizing?
Well, a good example is my house is about 500 meters from a trailhead. And so if I'm working on a project, if I'm writing and I get stuck, I know that if I put my shoes on and run down to that trail, by the time I'm, 3 or 4 minutes down the trail, that running problem will have solved itself, just because I'm out of my head. I'm not thinking about, being, really prissy about, and whatever the words I want to put on the page. Instead, you know, my mind is expanded a little bit because I'm out in nature. I'm by myself. I'm enjoying the solitude of the trail with all the smells, here in Southern California of sage and dry brush, all those things that kind of make you come alive a little bit more. And I would say that that is probably true for, and I can't speak for everybody, but it's probably true for people, they're in their office all day long and they finally, end of the day, they get to change into their stuff and go for a little run. And maybe that little run turns into a longer run. But there's something to be said. It's like at the end of Born to Run by Springsteen. He says, someday, girl, I don't know when, we're going to get to that place we really want to go and we'll walk in the sun. Well, everybody thinks Born to Run is about running away from something, but it's actually running toward that place in the sun, that place where you can feel at ease and comfortable. That's what running is. I mean, I don't care if you do your runs around a track and you're doing the same loop again and again and again. There's something freeing about getting out there and just finding yourself and getting, throwing off the shackles of convention and just being yourself for a while.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, you're making me remember the moment that I fell in love with running as its own discipline. I grew up playing hockey and soccer. Running is just what you do as an elite soccer player. We would have running only practices and then start off all of our practices with lots and lots and lots of running. But it wasn't until I got into nature and your mention of Thoreau is prescient because I'm a big Thoreau respecter, and I believe he'd be he'd probably be one of the best ultra marathoners. I think if he was around, if he was that, yeah. if he was around today. You read Walden and you think, man, this guy could have really been an ultra marathon king out there. But to me, it was that sense of freedom in two different ways. The first is that freedom of just being alive in nature. I'm a big nature lover and hiker and camper and all those things, but I'd never pushed myself like physically in on a trail before. So just like that feeling of, and you sort of mentioned it, nobody is around, nobody can tell me what to do. I'm just here. And then the second part of freedom was that, when you're running fast down a hill and there's rocks and there's roots and you're trying not to trip over and injure yourself, sometimes you got to make a jump. And I remember this jump, like this one jump where it was that split second going downhill, running fast, and you catch that hang time, that feeling of flight. And I thought, okay, this is the thing that I've found. I can't play hockey. I can't play soccer anymore. This was when I was 24, 25, my days of being an elite athlete and really pushing myself and striving hard in the sports that I was accustomed to and familiar with, those doors were closed. But the moment I caught air, I thought, oh, wow, this is a brand new trajectory. This is a brand new path. This is a brand new me almost. And, I've been a pretty dedicated trail runner now for the past 13 years. But to me, it's like that feeling of finding yourself in running that is so powerful. And I think that relates back to, your choice of individuals, the heroism that they display, and even your own history in running. It comes through so strongly in the book. So, just for people out there listening, there are a million different ways that you can run, and whichever one kind of speaks to you is a way in which you may actually be able to know yourself a little bit better.
Yeah, definitely. And I feel like it's weird because people want to put us all into a box, and I don't think that really works in the running world. I mean, and if you're an Olympian, that's one thing. If that's a different kind of training. But realistically, if you're an age group runner, and I don't care if you are a 220 marathoner and you're an age grouper, you're still an age grouper. And so the reasons for running should not be to impress people with your worthiness as a runner. It should be very much more about it's a lifestyle, but it's a lifestyle sport, but it's also a lifelong sport. And so, and I like the idea of people being runners for a lifetime instead of jumping on the bandwagon for like a year or two and joining a running crew and doing this, and then 2 years from now you're moving on, and all of a sudden your thing is road cycling or step aerobics. I don't know, but it's just the whole idea that running is something you can and should do for the entirety of your life, and find enjoyment in your own space within that, and kind of be competitive if you're at a phase in life when you're competitive. Be not competitive. Maybe you just get out and you run with your dog, but it's something that we can and should embrace as one of the few things you can do throughout the rest of your life. And like you said, if you're a soccer player or a hockey player or a football player, those careers all kind of come to an end at some point. Running is one of the few things that is going to be with you until you're as long as you want it to, I should say.
Yeah, and within running, what I think is very important, as you mentioned, this sort of lifelong desire, is that I can still strive. I can still strive in running in ways that other sports kind of prevent me from striving as I age out. And that doesn't mean I get faster every year, but it means that there's always a space where I can carve out to go for a personal best or to really push myself and challenge myself, I think, in a serious way. And without that, I think sports, if we're trying to participate in them, I think they lose something very important. I mean, there's a lot of beer league hockey players out there, but it's not scratching this,
Yeah.
it's not
Yeah.
scratching the same itch, I think, as runners when they go out for the long run, for example. And I wanted to ask you about your coaching because you coach, you're saying high school kids. So these are kids that, they care about obviously their performance, they're competitive, they're elite for their age, but most of them will never run in the Olympics. Most of them will never make a cent from running. So how do you as a coach balance that in terms of we're here to perform, I'm here to get the best out of you as a runner, but also I want to set you up for maybe a lifetime of success in the sport, and I want to, prepare you not just to run fast, when you're a high school senior,
Yeah.
but that you can have a really holistic and strong relationship with running throughout your entire life. Like how do you balance
That's
that? It seems to me a very
um,
difficult
I
thing to do.
I think it starts with just consistency. I find that people, and I'm just speaking now only as a coach, not as a writer, but when people when people show up every day, and I tell people that flat out, it's one of the first things I say the first day of practice when they're a freshman in high school, is the people who do well in the sport show up every day. And we'll take Sunday off just because I feel like for a young runner, it's nice to get some downtime, some recovery time. But if you can show up 6 days a week throughout the whole season, and this is also while juggling, the stress of an academic load, trying to get enough sleep at night, trying to have a social life, it's a lot, but for the most part, people stick with it because I talk about all those things that are going to stand them in good stead, the perseverance and the stick to itiveness and all the things that come with being a good runner. And we start easy. If you're a new runner, you're not going to do much at first, but by the time they're juniors and seniors, the guys are running about 60 to 65 a week. The girls are running 50 to 55. And it's a mixture of our long run is, like I said before, it's conversational with a tempo push at the end. We'll do a couple workouts a week, and they evolve as the season goes on. We'll do a lot of thresh. We'll do a lot of VO2. At the end, we'll do a lot of lactic work. But the whole idea is I'd like to build that sense of community.
Mhm.
So, within every team, there's going to be one or two runners that are going to be your stars. I've had guys go under 4:10 in the mile and under 9 minutes in the 2 mile. I've had girls go under five. I've got one girl right now who's 2:15 for the 8. She's 4:56 for the mile. She's 10:37 for 2 miles. So a good all around runner. But at the same time, you can't focus on those people. You need to bring the whole group in. So, and from the most talented runner to the ones that are struggling to kind of find their stride and their rhythm, I try to make them all feel included. It's simple things like encouragement, high fives during a hard workout, um, there's a little bit of yelling sometimes when people are just kind of feeling a little bit lazy and sloppy and not getting things going. There's a lot of, I'm big on telling people that I love them. It's like, I love you guys. You're a great team. I want to build that sense of community, but I also want to impress upon them the fact that we are here to race. We're going to develop our love of running, but we're going to do it through some really hard work.
Yeah, that seems to me to be a very solid harmony between, the drive for performance, but also a step back and thinking about the powerful holistic benefits, and it feels like you're talking to the age groupers out there, as well, right? Because we can't take, as you mentioned, right? There's this duality in running, where the numbers, they give this oversized meaning to what we're doing, but as I so often talk about with my audience, we can't allow the numbers to be in the driver's seat. They have to alert us, if we're doing a good job or a bad job. But ultimately, if that's where the meaning is coming from, we're going to be left pretty empty and void, and searching for something else, because eventually all those numbers will turn against us, if we're just hoping to get faster and faster forever. There's so many neat things that are flooding into my mind when you talk about coaching, and in particular, one of the questions that I had written down was, what kind of a question, or what question would you have loved to ask some of the runners, in your book? And I know that you talked with a few of them, so those got answered. But maybe I'll ask Martin to put on his coaching hat. Is there anything that you would say to some of the? We'll just pick the 4 runners on the book here: Steve, Frank, Joan, and Greta. What, as a running coach, will say one thing of each that you admire, and maybe one piece of advice for each runner in the book, just from your opinion as a coach, as a fun little exercise here.
So Steve Prefontaine, when he died at the age of 24, he held every American distance record from 2,000 meters up to 10,000 meters. So, but what I admire about him is not just that performance level. I admired his brash, insouciant way of approaching life. Again, when I first became a runner, it's running had a high nerd factor. It was just one of those outsider sports, and kind of the ideal of a track runner was Jim Ryan. I mean, an amazingly successful distance runner, but very, straight arrow, tight, high and tight haircut, teetotaler. Pre comes in there and he is just cocky. He's got a porn star mustache. He's got a big mop of hair. He runs from the front. He had muscles. He had actual pec muscles and biceps. Like, he looked like a dude. And, as a young kid, it's like, that's my guy, and I think that's why even now, 50 years later, people are still, Prefontaine's name comes up. You see high school kids wearing Prefontaine t-shirts. You hear kids saying, I want to race like Pre, which means race from the front fearlessly and just go for it. So then you contrast it with Frank Shorter. Frank Shorter is just a very talented runner, but just a man of methodical routine. Ran twice a day, 10 in the morning, 10 in the afternoon, was very religious about it. To this day, he's still a very stickler for that routine about training. But when and it wasn't Pre. He was friends with Pre, but he wasn't Pre. He was a little bit more prickly, but at the same time, he raced with a confidence, and his stride was one of the smoothest, most supple gaits you'll ever see in your life. It just looks like he's floating. He's amazing. Greta, I admire because, remember, there was no women's Olympic marathon until 1984. And so she won New York in 1978, and she won 9 New Yorks in her career. But in 1972 and 1976, she was a 1,500 meter runner in the Olympic Games because there wasn't anything else for women. And both times she got, she lost out in rounds. She didn't make the final. And she was on the verge of giving up with her running when she finally, just on a whim, took on the New York Marathon. But what I like about her is that she trained like a marathoner even when she was just running the 1,500. She did some big mileage weeks. She did a lot of hard threshold, a lot of hill work, a lot of the stuff that you would imagine more of a road racer would do instead of a track racer. And then, of course, there's Joan Benoit, now Joan Benoit Samuelson. Um, Everybody thinks about the 1984 Olympics when she won. Greta was second, Joan beat her. But what I liked more about Joan when I researched for the book was the way she is a very quiet person, but also very outspoken. Someone who very much speaks her mind. And I think running needed a voice like that because women's running had been like this quiet. Um, if you had a New York or a Boston marathon, maybe 5 or 10% of the competitors were women, and so Joan comes out there and she's like, women deserve to be here. We are part of this, and that's why I think because of Joan is why we have almost 50-50 participation between men and women these days, is because you had a strong, fearless voice that came out and said, women belong here, and women heard her.
Yeah, powerful. There's another one of those powerful themes that runs throughout the book is that um, there's this disbelief that people can do this and it can't destroy them. It starts with the men and it lasts longest with the women. Um, and my own particular expertise in sport is the 19th century and certainly the revival of the athletic ideal that, physical activity is a good thing for physical health. It just seems so, it's ubiquitous now, but one of the things your book does a really nice job of highlighting for people is that this wasn't the case for most of history. And even recently, men and women have been held back by the idea that running a long distance is actually detrimental for your health. And it's unfortunate that that the women had to suffer a little bit longer underneath those restrictions. But I wonder if you just could speak to why it was so important for you to include the trials and the tribulations of the women alongside the men, particularly as they battled just to be able to compete, in these longer running distances.
Oh, sure. It kind of feels natural. I mean, it's especially I was married to a very, very strong woman. So if I hadn't put the women there, she would have kicked my ass. But I think, but more important, if you're telling a historical narrative, you have to follow the history. And if you look at the history of distance running, it bends toward we have 1972 and shorter in Prefontaine, and we kind of build up to the 1976 New York City Marathon, which is the first 5 boroughs marathon. And that story kind of tells itself. But then if you follow the story, all of a sudden you realize the next big moment is when Greta Weitz shows up. And not only is she running alongside the men, she's beating the men. And people didn't know who she was because she wasn't listed in the elite program. And so that happened. I mean, it's just one of those things that was a part of the legacy of women. And if I had left that out, it would have been glaring. And so in the next step after that is, the inclusion of the women's marathon in the 1984 Olympics. And, on the day of that race, Joan Benoit had raced Greta Weitz. Over their careers, they raced 11 times. Greta won 10 of them. But the one that everybody remembers is at 84 when Joan stole the race with a brash. It was hot. She went out early. She held the pace the whole time, did not back down. And it was televised. So people are watching this around the world. They're watching this woman. Her reproductive organs are not falling out, is what people used to say. That was what's going to happen to women. And anything but that. She was clipping along at a great pace, at a pace that would have won the 1970 New York City Marathon. Her pace was faster than the man who won that. So not only are women doing it, they're doing it just as well as the men. And again, that's just the historical narrative. And I'll take even a step further. It was 1982 when Oprah ran the Marine Corps Marathon. And Oprah did not look like a traditional marathoner. And yet when she finished that sparked a huge boom in women's running. And you can't ignore that. It's, again, if you're going to tell a historical story, you've got to throw in all the key moments, and that's one of them.
Absolutely. There was something that's really neat about both the history of the men's and the women's marathon, and there's a little bit of an echo in the writing too about those tired, rugged, painful finishes that people expect to see at the marathon. I'm thinking of Dorando Pietri in 1908, and then certainly one of the reasons why the women were not allowed to run anything over 800 meters was because of the 1928 Olympics in Amsterdam, where women were allowed to run 800 meters, and they didn't look so good at the finish line. But to be fair, nobody should look good at the end of the finish line of the 800-meter race.
No.
And then you get 72, you get shorter, and you already mentioned the word smooth. And then you get 1984, you get Benoit, and another one of these smooth visuals, right, from the back of that van is not some runner that is expiring, but someone who's actually thriving in this race. So I just wonder if what is the importance of smoothness to a runner? Like, what is the importance of smoothness both when you're running, but also in precipitating other people to want to run as well? Because we're talking about this boom, and we're talking about people getting inspired to do the thing themselves. Like, how important is smoothness in all of this?
Another word for it is running economy. And running economy means you're most efficient if you are running in a very linear fashion. And so, what you'll see a lot, the biggest giveaway for not having great running economy is arms that go side to side, or arms that kind of flap around a lot. There's other things, sometimes people will not drive their knee forward and still they'll kind of flip their ankle out, so they're not using their big quadricep muscles. They're using smaller muscles to do the work for them, and that's really just a matter of running a lot, doing drills, really getting it. I mean, I saw a video of the Australian national championships the other day, and a 19-year-old kid won the 1500 meters, which is the metric mile, in 3:29. And if you watch his form, like, everything is just nice, and his arms go straight back and forth, his knees just lift just enough, not super high like a sprinter, and certainly not a shuffle like an ultra runner, but just that nice thing. And you watch it, and all that energy is going straight into running forward as fast as possible. There's nothing lateral. There's nothing where, the hips, like, people drop their hips. That's one of the things that will make you slow, is you got to keep your hips forward. You got to keep your shoulders back. You've got to keep your chin up. All those things can be learned, can be taught. But if you can learn how to do those and make them second nature, you will just naturally start running faster, and it will feel easier.
So, like, the running economy, just knowing how to do it makes it, even though you're putting out a tremendous amount of effort, that's what allows you to have this sort of almost like and I think this runners may describe it as such, as like that feeling of freedom when you're running, where the legs just seemingly turn over. They're almost in their own revolution with themselves.
I remember one run a long time ago. I was with a group of about 5 or 6 guys, and I was in pretty good shape, and they were in pretty good shape, and we were running down Laguna Canyon Road, which, if you know it, is a beautiful, 2-lane highway that goes from from industrial Irvine all the way down to Pacific Ocean. And it's just one of those things where we got into a rhythm as a group, and the chit chat went away. Next thing you know, we were just running, and it was one of those things where you say, how much longer can I hold on to this? And then it becomes transcendent, because you're with this group and you're floating and you're doing something magical as a group. And it just feels like, it's like Christmas in October or something like that. It just feels like one of the most amazing sensations.
Yeah, anybody, that's like the flow zone of running right there. I think I think that's what makes you fall in love with running. That's that moment in the forest where I caught air, is exactly that kind of moment. From your vantage, both witnessing it live as it was happening, but also now being a historian of it, do you think that is what was communicated through the screen with people watching Shorter in 72 and Benoit in 1984 is that sense of, wow, they're lost in it. Like it seems so easy for them right now. Was that really like coming through the broadcast?
Yeah, definitely. I'll contrast that with the Shorter race with Prefontaine's race, because
Yeah.
they were going on at the same time. The marathoners left the stadium, then the 5K got on the track, and that was Pre's race. And so, as somebody who watched that race, and I've talked to so many people during the writing of this book who also watched and were inspired by that race, when we saw Shorter doing what he was doing and making it look simple, and he's running through the streets of Munich, he's running through the gardens of Munich, which are actually great little trails. They're not paved, and but he's just flowing. He's just going along there, and so then you contrast it with Prefontaine's race, where Prefontaine, he took the pace down masterfully from 68s to 67s to 63s to 62s to 61s, and but the thing about it is, and it was so intense and it was so amazing, and the finish was so devastating. But at the same time, people watching that race, nobody in their right mind thought that they could run like Steve Prefontaine. They could idolize him, they could emulate him, but the idea of running that fast at such a high level was not something that people thought they could do. And they didn't think they could run as fast as Shorter either. But what people came with that race was, I can't run that fast, but if I just keep running, I can run that far. And that got people thinking that, hey, maybe I want to run a marathon. And, just a couple months later, a whole group of women sat down at the starting line of the New York City Marathon, the 6U sit. They literally sat down at the start to protest a rule that said they couldn't run with men. And they won the day. When the time came, they stood up and they started the race with the men. And it was just one of those things where this is how revolutions start. Like these little moments that just explode just because somebody sees something about it, and it becomes something aspirational within them, and something they never thought that they wanted to do, and all of a sudden becomes something, hey, I might want to give that a try.
Yeah, yeah. That very important idea of like seeing yourself or visualizing yourself or imagining yourself doing the same thing. It's really neat how like a style of running can be communicated, and that people are watching. They can immediately almost like embody that in what they see of themselves moving forward. And it was another question that I had written down here. How important is style to the individual runner or to the running boom or the running revolution? We can think about that in terms of all style, but you have bits about Nike and shoes and about clothing and about particular ways of running and certain distances. How important is the fact that people can proclaim a sense of styles through this thing in a whole bunch of different ways, contribute to the fact that all these individuals start picking up running?
You're asking the wrong guy about style. I walk around in a hoodie all the time, so
No,
but I will say this. Like I'm a big fan of running form, like that term, running economy. I think it's super important, and I feel like it's something people don't want to pay attention to, because people will say, well, I'm not going to change my gait because it's my unique gait. And it's like, well, it wouldn't hurt you just to kind of tighten it up a little bit, get a little bit better. But I know there's a big impetus right now on shoes, and I actually literally have runners who they've got a different shoe for the warm up, for the cool down, for the track work. And I'm not talking about spikes, I'm just talking about a regular trainer. And so that's really becoming more and more important to a lot of people. I wear Asics Gel Cayano. I have for 20 years, and so I'm a one shoe guy, but and when it comes time to go outside, I just like a good pair of shorts and a comfortable sweatshirt, a t-shirt. But I know there are a lot of people out there who like to. It's that the color palette really becomes a really important part of their thing. And in my point of view on that is like, whatever floats your boat. I mean, if it makes you feel more collected, more like a runner, more happy in your own skin to be wearing, completely matching apparel with matching shoes, and by all means, whatever makes you happy. And on the other hand, if you just want to throw on a pair of shorts and maybe your shoes got a few too many miles on them, and you want to go out and just go find a happy place to run, that's the great thing about the sport. You can do it any way you want to.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. And I have this quote from you as well. Quote, every run is your own, and like it or not, running demands that you own it. And to me, that's like a perfect declaration of style, right? Your style is same shoes, comfy shorts, similar hoodie, trails, silence, solitude, like trails, silence, solitude. That's my style as well. I tend to push it a little bit in terms of fueling, or in my case, the lack of fueling, which is a part of my own particular style, which emerged just out of the vanity of not liking to carry a water bottle when I'm running.
Yeah.
Right? Like you do that for
I'm with you. I'm with you on that one.
yeah, you do that for 13 years and you can run surprisingly far without a water bottle. If you keep pushing yourself. So there's that really cool way in which running really does allow us a sense of, individual freedom, style, expression. But within this larger community of myths and legends and people who've had their own styles, it's really striking to talk about Steve Prefontaine on one hand and Jim Ryan on the next, and how they both, through their own way, can contribute to different individuals seeing themselves inside of running. And ultimately, I think that's what gives the sport such an incredible lift, is that we all get to be our own person inside of it. So with that, I think we'll start to circle around the end here. And thank you so much for your time and for this really excellent conversation. You haven't given away too much of the book either, which is great. Definitely get the book. Definitely get the book, everybody. Yeah. Definitely read the book. But sort of one final question. Well, actually two. Two final questions here, and then we'll land this off here. So the first question is, what do you love most about telling the running story? Like, what do you love most about being the person with the megaphone who's now spreading this story out in the particular way that you've put it? And then secondly, what's your favorite running story about yourself? Because the big thing for me is like the love of sport and the love of the adventure and the love of the activity just for the sake of doing it. So for me, that would be an amazing way to finish this one off. So the first one, what do you love most about the running story? And then what's your favorite running story about yourself, so we can send people off inspired to maybe go out on a run on their own?
So when I wrote The Long Run, I really wasn't trying to, do any myth busting or debunking of, popular theories. But then it was so great to do the deep dive on the research and look at running. For someone who's run his whole life, to look at running through brand new eyes, it was just an amazing, amazing, amazing feeling. And I had a good friend who he writes for the New York Times. He read the book and he goes, dude, it's just like two people out there out for a long run, and we're just talking about the history of running, and it really comes through. And I didn't set out to have that kind of voice with it, but that to me was the highest compliment you could have paid, because I just love that. And again, not to get too cute with the title of The Long Run, but to have someone compare it to a discussion during a long run was high praise. My own running memories, a couple good ones. When my wife was a new runner, I remember one time we're out on a trail and I promised her it was a flat trail, and I had just never noticed that it was actually pretty hilly. And she got very angry with me. And the other one is the one year when I was running the LA Marathon, I don't know, a few years ago, 20 years ago. I was struggling. At 18 or 19. I had just kind of hit a wall. I hadn't trained properly. And my dad, who was a lifelong runner, he just kind of stepped out of the crowd and he ran with me. kind of carried me to the finish. And that's what running does. It just kind of builds that bridge. And it was just a very emotional moment for me, as you can hear, it still is today. But to
Absolutely.
get that, yeah, to get that kind of support and make that kind of connection, it's a pretty special feeling.
Yeah, the opportunities to share with other people in running is, I think, one of the most incredible parts about it. And, people listening to this know, that I coach other people through ultra marathons, and I'm the one, even when I'm in my own race, I'm the one who's cheering on people inside the race, and I find people to coach because to me, like it's the sharing of the experience and the sharing of the suffering that really allows running to bring people together in so many powerful ways, whether that's watching somebody on the screen do something incredible, or you like standing next to thousands and thousands of people in a starting corral ready to go out and go have an adventure. Um, to me, it's like these meaningful moments in our lives and the ways in which the sport allows us to, you know, paint a portrait of who we want to be in an artistic way, but not in a fake way, not in a false way, because we got to go out and do it. To me, running, and I just think running is a great metaphor for life. I think it is life. I have some wild theories about what it actually is and does for us, but that's definitely a talk for another time.
You can't, you cannot, uh, you cannot be inauthentic in during a run. It is what it is. You're all in.
Yeah. Oh, I like that. You can't be inauthentic during a run. You may be able to you may be able to, you know, you may be able to put on a brave face, because we're all kind of struggling on the inside, but and this is something that it's so funny that you say that. Especially cuz I don't do the marathon world, I do the ultra marathon world, so it's a bit different in what people are out there to do and what they're hoping to accomplish, and particularly what they're trying um, to find out about themselves. But you really find out what a person is all about when they're in the pain cave, and they're either responding with excuses, they're responding with anger and frustration, or they're responding, with gratitude and acceptance. And that is the place where I try to push myself, and certainly the people who I instruct about becoming their best selves through this stuff. But it's so true what you say about you have to be authentic. The real you comes out there, and boy, we should be grateful for such a gift to be able to bring ourselves out, and then to be able to know, hey, when the chips are down, like that better part of my character that actually shines through. And one of the sayings that we have in the sort of like the coaching world that I do, which is not technical coaching, but more sort of mentorship and life coaching, is that you sign up for the race so that you can meet the version of you who crosses the finish line, right? And whether that's
Yeah,
in a
I agree
race
with
or
that.
yeah, whether it's in a race or a long run, ultimately, if that's why we're out there, like we're never going to be dissatisfied no matter what number we hit in whatever race. And I think that's one fantastic reason for all of us to want to fall in love with running. Martin, this has been great. Any final words or thoughts before we wrap this up for the people?
No, Jordan, I'm good. I'm just buy my book. The long run is it's unique. We're not doing an average running book. We're doing something special, and I hope you all enjoy it. Go to my website, martindugard.com. After you've read the book, send me an email. Let me know what you thought, and I'll respond to every email. I'd love to hear from you. And while you're at it, go on Amazon or Barnes& Noble or Goodreads and leave a nice review and tell people what you think. Um, like I said, a nice review. So, but hey, either way, shoot me an email, and I would love to talk to you.
That's great. Thank you so much. I will link your website. I'll link Amazon so people can purchase the book. And that's really wonderful. Martin, thank you so much for your time and for the great conversation today. It was a real pleasure to be able to get my hands on the book and to read it, and a real honor to have the opportunity to talk with you about it today. So thank you so much for your time. And for
That was a lot of fun. I had a great time.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you, and you made me very happy with a giant compliment right off the bat, saying the first question I asked was a good question. So for a
No, it was a very this was a very unique interview. I appreciated the deep dive. It was fun.
Oh, thank you so much. You know, you can when you compliment a philosopher, you say you ask really great questions. I never promise answers or conclusions, but I promise some questions and some conversation. So this was really excellent. Again, everybody, go pick up The Long Run. And if you really liked that book, what I'm going to do is probably go and look for a few more of your books, because I really enjoyed reading this one. It was a good change of pace for me. And especially look for some of those history ones too. As a historian, I guess former historian myself, I'll be doing that. So thank you so much, guys. We'll check you back next time. I don't have a number 78 athlete lined up for the next episode, but I got some time, so I'll figure that out. So all the links will be in the show notes. And if you want to get in contact with me, all my contact information will be down there. Thank you so much, and we'll see you in the next one. I'll just hit